So welcome everybody to the webinar about Target ALS and advancing ALS research with Modality. We have the absolute pleasure of having Amy Easton with us today. She is the Senior Director of Scientific Programs at Target ALS. Thank you very much for making time today on Valentine's Day in the Bay Area.
Thanks for inviting me, David.
It's a beautiful opportunity to talk more about Target ALS and also how the work that you do relate to digital health technologies, including Modality. This is the agenda for today's webinar. We will do a quick round of introductions to both Modality as well as Target ALS, because I believe there's going to be a number of new attendees that may not be too familiar with either one of our organizations. So we want to make sure that we provide a little bit of context, but not too much, because the bulk part of our webinar today is going to be conversational. We have a number of important questions and topics that we want to cover today. And we also strongly encourage that anyone in the audience, please use the Q&A button to ask us questions, ask Amy questions about Target ALS and in our relationship, and also the use of digital health technologies such as Modality.AI in their programs. So without further ado, let me just give a brief intro into what Modality is doing. Then I will introduce Amy, and she will talk about Target ALS and their specific mission to make a difference in ALS. So when you talk about ALS, one of the significant issues that many of you are aware of is that it is very difficult to show that therapeutic interventions work. Many of the drug trials fail. And that is, among other reasons, because it is very difficult to assess how therapeutic interventions change the progression of the disease. And that is, among other reasons, because the way it is being assessed today is mostly through clinical assessments, such as scales like the ALSFRS-R that are being used, and which is still regarded the primary endpoint for drug approval for ALS. And that is something that we all know has significant issues, such as that things are not sensitive, not robust, not comprehensive, that it is usually requiring people to come to the clinic, and there's a bias and subjectivity involved there as well. So one would wish there was a way to objectively do these measurements, do them at scale, do them in the convenience of people's homes, measure what patients feel, how patients feel, and how they function in a way that is using a more objective and repeatable and interpretable way. And that is what we do with Modality. We have a virtual guide that basically plays the role of a neurologist, and she interviews patients, does so in a way that captures what they say and what they do, their speech responses to certain tasks and exercises that Tina walks them through, as well as their facial movements, their body movements, their cognitive behaviors. And Tina also asks patients to describe their most bothersome problems in their own words. So she also cares about how patients feel. And that's done on your own device, usually at people's homes. So they're familiar with the device. They don't have to install any software, and they don't even have to remember passwords or credentials, so that we make it as easy and friendly for the participants to engage not with Tina and with the digital measurements of disease progression and therapeutic effect. We work with a number of for-profit and non-profit organizations to advance research in digital health technologies, Modality, audio and video technologies. Target ALS, of course, is a very important partner of ours. We are funded by the National Institutes of Health, other organizations, and other diseases as well. Many biotech companies, pharma companies that are using us in many different sorts of studies, observational studies, interventional trials, phase 1 through phase 3 trials as observational, as endpoints. And you see here a little overview of the different disease categories, ALS being right at the top alongside Parkinson's disease. And we are international. We will talk about international studies with Amy in a moment as well, because it is important to not just look at certain geographies, but really do so for the patients in the world. And that's what we've focused on. And now talking about Target ALS, we are very happy to have Amy on this webinar today. She's, as I mentioned, the Senior Director of Scientific Programs at Target ALS, has been there for almost 3 years now, and has significant experience in drug and biotech industry, including her tenure at Genentech as a head of translational neuroscience over there, also as a principal scientist at BMS right before this. Her academic career, among other places, included the Rockefeller University, where she received a postdoc training and the PhD originally from Northwestern in Chicago. And I really pleased to have Amy with us today, and she will talk a little bit more about Target ALS. I gave a little bit of a sense of what you do, but you can express these things much better.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the introduction. I'm really super thrilled to be here today to talk with you about ALS and how we're thinking about digital health technology in this area. And what I particularly love about what you do is that you're at the intersection of a number of different therapeutic areas. So you're not just helping people in ALS, but you're helping people across the neurodegenerative disease spectrum. And so in case we've got some folks who've joined today who don't know too much about ALS, I'm just going to start with a little brief background. So ALS stands for Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis. This is a rare disease. About 3 in 100,000 people per year will get ALS. That's the worldwide incidence. And the average onset is between 40 to 60 years of age. And we know that there are a number of people even younger than 40 who will experience ALS. So, and if you just go back 1 second, ALS, the picture on the right is really just showing you that ALS refers to motor neurons, a specific set of motor neurons in the brain and spinal cord that become sick and they eventually die. And those neurons are really important for regulating muscles throughout your body and in your limbs that are regulating voluntary muscle control. And so these cells degenerate over time, and they're irreversibly repaired. So if we go to the next slide, then what we know about the cause of ALS is that about 10% of ALS can be inherited and can be caused by about a handful of known genetic mutations. But the other 90% of people who have ALS are referred to as sporadic cases, which means that we don't really fully understand what is the cause of their disease. But we do think that there is probably some combination of inherited genetic risk factors that we haven't yet identified, somatic genetic risk factors, and environmental factors such as toxins or injuries. And overall, this is a heterogeneous disease. So people who have it have differing causes and differing clinical manifestations. So some people may experience changes in speech at onset, while others may experience changes in limbs at onset, and rates of progression can differ. So what Target ALS has been doing is to really try to help fund research that understands the causes of these diseases and ultimately the treatment for the disease. So we were founded in 2013 by Dan Doctoroff, who has ALS and has experienced, a family history of ALS. And what I really appreciate about his thinking from the beginning was that we would operate in a way that was set on a specific set of founding principles. So at that time, he realized that we had gaps in funding. There was limited industry investment because industry didn't know what to tackle, where to start. Research was siloed. People are working in different work streams and they're competitive. People who apply for funding can experience bias in the funding decisions, and overall just a lack of resources and tools that you need to do high quality research. And finally, some legal issues related to IP and some groups trying to obtain reach through on IP. So, and I think what's so interesting is that these are all timely. They're still issues today, and we've developed a set of strategies to alleviate these barriers. So if we go to the next slide, we have always operated with the goal of collaborative funding. So many of our grants are based on funds that go to collaborative groups, including academic and industry groups. So we really foster the collaboration with industry from the beginning, original founding days of Target ALS. Also, scientific tools and resources. We've developed a suite of those, and I'm going to talk to you more about that soon. And we operate in a way that we are never asking for IP. We always make it easy for academics and industry to use the resources that we have available. And finally, we have also implemented an independent grant review. We have a wonderful independent review committee who are experts across the whole neurodegenerative field. And so everyone can be comforted that they have a fair review of their proposals that are submitted. And we also have an annual meeting every year and many different ways to that being a big one, but many different ways to allow everyone in our ecosystem, nonprofits, VCs, industry and academics to network and talk to each other to remove those silos and barriers to research. So we go to the next slide. You can see from this graph that our investment, thanks to our generous donors, our investment in research has been increasing over the past year. So in 2024, we invested about 23 million. About 70% of those funds went out to researchers around the world, and about 30% of those funds were dedicated to building out core resources and tools that researchers use. And collectively, those funds go to study three main areas: the underlying disease biology, drug discovery to help facilitate that, and to facilitate biomarker development. So in the next slide, I'm just sharing with folks the core resources that we offer. Since the early days of Target ALS, we've built a postmortem tissue core. So we have a large tissue repository, and we regularly give out the tissue to researchers around the world. And this is supported by 6 wonderful PIs and institutions, folks who are experts in collecting these tissue and stewarding the tissue well. Second, in the middle box, we more recently have developed a longitudinal biofluid repository as well. So we recognized over the past few years that there is a need for human specimens. These are critical for supporting high quality translational research, and particularly longitudinal biofluids, where you can best assess biomarkers that might tell you something about disease progression. So we decided to invest in building out this repository, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally, we have a stem cell core. So we've got a suite of patient stem cell lines, and we're starting to build that out in the different tools there, and we make them available to everyone as well. And so then if you look, what we do then is we've had a strategy all along to generate genomic data sets and multi-omic data sets from all of these different contexts, whether it's postmortem tissue or people living with ALS who are donating their biofluids, where the metadata is really critical to helping to understand the data that you get from those biofluids, or whether it's stem cells. We're investing in generating large genomic data sets from those samples. And finally, we share them. We share them through the Target ALS data engine, which is a really wonderful place for any researcher to go to access and mine these data sets in the cloud. So next slide is just to give a little more context for what we're going to talk about today, David, is this natural history study that Target ALS launched, I would say late 2020, early 2021, we started to work with 6 US-based sites. The lead site is Barrow Neurological Institute, and Dr. Bob Bowser, who's the CSO of Barrow, is the lead for our natural history study. We started with a small number of clinics, and we pretty quickly realized that we needed to expand this. And we're really excited to say that in 2024, we really made our first, we accomplished that expansion to international sites. And so those international sites include sites like Instituto Roosevelt, which is in Bogota, Colombia. Yes, thank you. And we're also in Israel. We've got a site there as well. And we've got a number of other sites in India, Malaysia, South Korea, also South Africa, Brazil, that we're working with. And they're at various stages of onboarding to be a part of this global natural history study. And so again, what the goal of this study is to really develop a comprehensive data set from a diverse set of patients, men and women, people of different ancestries around the world, where ALS can arise in different manners and from different genetic mutations. So we really wanted to have this comprehensive global assessment of ALS. And the beauty of Target ALS as a nonprofit is that we can fill in the space where it's difficult for other organizations to fill. So companies may want to understand how the disease progresses with respect to digital health technologies, but they may not be able to necessarily run that trial on top of all the interventional trials that they've got planned. There are certainly exceptions to that where companies are doing that, but on the whole, there's kind of a gap there. Digital health technology companies also don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the expertise to run such a non-interventional trial. So Target ALS is really proud and thrilled to be able to support filling in this high unmet need. And we're doing it with wonderful PIs around the world who are really in the lab or in the clinic rather, and coordinators who are in the clinic meeting with the patients on this study. So to date, we have 182 participants enrolled. I think 103 have completed the study, and about 60% of those folks are ALS patients. And yeah, and so we just jumped ahead here. But so maybe if you go back to that slide, David, sorry, I think I was just wrapping up thoughts.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, so we're basically just really thrilled to have seen 182 participants enrolled, and we're going to keep going. So we have plans to continue this over the next 5 years to enroll at least 1,000 patients around the world. We've got 14 clinical sites, and some of these sites are working with the Modality platform. So that's what we're going to talk to you more about today. And I think we can stop there, David. We can start to just jump into some of the topics we wanted to cover.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, for providing this really good overview about the mission and specific goals that you have with Target ALS, and specifically you're really providing tools and data to the community that otherwise would be very hard to get by for small organizations, small biotech companies, but even for academic researchers as well. So you explained what you do with the observational study just now. You talked about the different sites, the types of data that you are collecting. I was wondering because a lot of the work that Target ALS had done in the past and had supported in the past was associated with interventional programs, preclinical interventional programs. That's a lot of the work that you've done. This is also now going into the clinical space. right? So in the observational studies, obviously are run at the clinic. You're looking at biomarkers, looking at digital health technologies. So what is the underlying thinking of what you will learn and how exactly this will benefit the actually bringing drugs to the market or therapeutic intervention to the actual ALS patients?
Yeah, thanks for that question, David. Well, I mean, I think what people should understand is when you have a drug and you get into clinic and you're in those those really important phase 2 trials where you're starting to understand, what does my drug do? Is it impacting the disease in the way that I expected it to? You have to do a lot of work that happens way before you get to that stage. And so there's all of the preclinical translational research that we support, and we've been supporting since 2013, things like testing drugs in the appropriate models, whether they're cell-based models or animal models, and allowing people to fully understand what does their molecule do at the bench before they actually get to the bedside. And there's so many different pieces that have to come together at the level of the clinical trial to make that a successful clinical trial. And so what we're thinking about is not that we want to run clinical trials, but it's rather providing the necessary preliminary data that allows drug companies to take it and use it. And in fact, they are. We've got lots of drug companies who come to the data engine to look at the data coming off of the natural history study now to say, what are the different biomarkers that are coming up that might allow us to stratify patients that go into that study, and how does the digital data that we are generating using the Modality platform, we're also using other platforms. So we're testing the oral analytics platform, we're testing Zephyrex, which is a at-home respiratory platform. And so they'll take them and say, are these data robust and are they sensitive enough? And therefore, can I use them as a way to make decisions in my early phase 1B, phase 2A trials, where I'm just trying to have a first look at what my drug is doing. So that's why we decided that we would focus on running this non-investigational trial, because it helps inform what you do in the clinic in so many ways and connects the dots from what happens at the bench with respect to understanding the translatability of that idea for that therapeutic or that biomarker to actual practice.
And that makes a lot of sense, because when you think about who would take that significant effort and that significant funding in order to do the foundational work to develop standard measures, for example, that can be used in clinical trials. Individual biotech companies that have these burning questions would likely not be in a position to run these studies themselves and fund them themselves. First of all, lack of funding, lack of time, lack of comprehensiveness, and it would not be the specific it would not be the right purpose for what a biotech company would usually do.
Yes, and David, maybe just also to be clear, as a nonprofit trying to help everybody in this space, when we do this and we provide these resources that come from our natural history study, we're giving them to everyone. So we're not looking for a particular to fulfill a particular group's desire. We're there to support everybody's research. And so that's again why it's important that nonprofits can come in and play this role.
Exactly. It's that non-competitive space that we are navigating, which is going to benefit everybody together, all the drug developers, but then ultimately the patients that we care about most, so that they get to see interventional successes faster. And so that's I think a very important goal here. So you talked about DHTs. there's also a number of DHTs. You mentioned Safaric's modality, of course. There's also more traditional things that you collect. Okay, can you dive a little bit deeper into what specifically you're collecting and how that is being used by the users of the database?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, what people have used in the past to assess patient function, what symptoms are they experiencing, and how does that change over time, is assessed by different rating scales. And so typically, patient will go into clinic, and they might do that every 3 or 4 months. If it's a clinical trial, they might do it twice, once in the beginning and once at the end of the trial. And so it's essentially a questionnaire where the rater, the nurse or the physician who's performing the scale, will rate the patient's function on depending on which scale we're talking about. So if it's ALS FRSR, it might be a scale of 0 to 4, where 4 they're performing well and 0 they've lost function in that particular domain. So by domain, I mean their speech or their respiratory function, their ability to move around, their mobility to get in and out of bed, to eat, all of those things. But the issue is that there are very specific questions, and 4 questions may not cover a comprehensive analysis of that particular domain, like speech. So it's to some extent a blunt instrument, and I think all of us in the field recognize that, and would love to see more sensitive instruments be used. And ALS-FRSR is just one. There are other assessments that are often used. So like in our natural history study, we were also incorporating cognitive assessments. So currently we are working with the ECAS, Edinburgh Cognitive Assessment, which we've preferred because we can capture more comprehensive analyses of cognition that may indicate signs of frontotemporal lobe dementia, not just ALS. And that's important because those 2 diseases are really falling on a spectrum, and in some cases aren't necessarily even 2 different diseases, and can stem from the same genetics or pathology. So we use that cognitive assessment in addition to the ALS-FRSR. But again, what you have is these discrete assessments. So patients come into clinic to do that every 4 months for our study for a period of 16 to 18 months. So this is really important, and I think it's a key part of the study. We wouldn't run the study without those assessments. Those are the gold standards. But we want to understand, if you allow for more dynamic measures of function, can that tell you a lot more about disease progression than these intermittent evaluations that patients typically experience? And there's so many benefits to that. So for the patient, they could, in ALS, and not just in ALS, but for patients with Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, they have difficulty with mobility. So to ask them to come into clinic often can be taxing. And so this notion that we can allow them to do assessments at home is really helps to allow for more patients to participate in decentralized studies, for example. But again, it's really, we're really interested in helping to support this study to determine whether Modality's platform can actually do a lot more with respect to detecting small changes in clinical symptoms in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this because there's these standard scales, there's things that are more established. Modality specific assessments are more established, like, for example, speaking rate and pause percentage and intelligibility. These are things that have been studied for a long period of time. You mentioned other things that are very top of mind for the understanding of how, for example, therapeutics really change the quality of life of individuals that take them. And specifically with Target ALS, we jointly developed, for example, these activity of daily living tasks. And I'm very happy to report that one of them, which is that you pretend to wash your face So patients are asked to pretend to wash their faces, and it's being videotaped, and Tina is giving these instructions. We have now an automated measure that actually measures how well you do this. And we have shown early strong correlations actually with the ALS-FRS subscore of hygiene already. And that's a very, very early and late breaking news here, but so that seems to be playing off. The other thing is the patient report of problems that I mentioned briefly in the beginning, which we are testing with Target ALS for the first time, which asks patients to describe their most bothersome problems, which is basically unlimited. So because it's open-ended and gives us more insight into how patients do.
Yeah. I love this, David. And again, I love, first of all, working with your team. It's wonderful to be flexible and allow for innovation along the way. And so adding in activities of daily living, I think, is really nice addition to the whole suite of tasks that Tina's taking the patients through. And again, the value, one of the value propositions is this is an objective measure of what people are actually doing. So this is not asking them specific questions that may not capture all of the different aspects of their disease. The modality platform is objectively measuring all of the different features of their response during these tasks. And the thing about what we're doing, David, that I like is that we've learned from the past. So we know that if our data set would ultimately be used to help support implementation into clinical trials, and if we want to ultimately get regulatory approval to use this in certain ways in the clinic, then having that patient-reported outcome, having the in-clinic assessments for ALS, FRSR, all as a suite of data that to complement modalities data will help advance the validation of this platform.
Absolutely. And I'm starting to receive requests and questions by the audience. And by the way, encourage everybody who's on today to use the Q&A feature as well. So I want to address something that came up that is associated with the observational study here, which is that there's certainly patients that are currently not treated versus ones that are receiving therapeutic treatment today. What's the proportion, as far as you know, in this study of people that are treated versus non-treated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the proportion is probably about maybe a third or a fourth. I mean, many patients are certainly going to be on things like riluzole,
Right.
and that will be noted. So researchers will know, okay, they have some treatments that they're on, but in terms of other clinical trials, we also have that noted. So yeah, I think approximately a third of the participants are co-enrolled in other trials, and that's actually a pretty interesting group of people. So I think eventually when we have higher enrollment, we'll be able to break down analyses in that way and understand how their disease progressed in that group.
That's right. And it also depends on the geography. There are certain treatments that are available in certain countries, in others they are not. Tofersen is of course another interesting intervention, which is only really effective for the SOD1 small cell population. One of the other questions was really because there's so many phenotypes, and you mentioned sporadic versus familial, and then there's different types of familial and genetic mutations that can happen. The goal is to collect from up to 1,000 individuals, right? Or how many?
Right. At least, yes.
At least. And so the question is, because there's so many phenotypes, and we know that country by country, these phenotypes also change, right? There's clusters of individuals from different countries that have different sorts of known or unknown root causes. So how do you think of distributing this? And should the goal be, that's the question here, to have 1,000 per country or region?
Oh, the question is, why not have 1,000 per country? We're going to start where we put our marker for now, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets bigger. I think I think we have to see, once we start looking at the data, what are we starting to discover? And then when we need more data, I think, Target ALS would certainly be committed to carrying this through. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Target, is that we have donor funds that allow us to be committed to carrying a project through from beginning to end. And so if that means we get to go to 1,000 patients per country, maybe we'll get there. But yeah, I appreciate the sentiment, and we're basically trying to think about that already across all of our clinical initiatives. So we have a separate initiative that allows us to just evaluate people in a very simple way in community with a one-time blood draw. This is really important for some parts of the world where they just aren't going to be able to come into clinic, like I mentioned. And so I think combined, our clinical research trials will hopefully get to those large sample sizes that we need for each of those specific locations.
Yeah, and it's really remarkable that you go into countries that have not had the benefit of running large observational studies in the past. So that is fantastic. And speaking of this, going to countries that have not had the significant infrastructure or exposure in the past, the question is, with rolling out certain, you just mentioned a blood draw in areas that are not very well connected, say, to a medical center. With these digital measures, such as, for example, respiration, you need to ship devices, right? Is that something that is happening in all these countries or just in certain regions?
So the question is, are we using these different devices in
like spirometry, for example? That was a question.
So no, we are not using all the different devices in every clinical site. And part of that reason is really just the big one is to avoid patient burden. We really recognize that at some point you're just asking patients to do too much. And so we wanted to, for modality, for example, we're only asking those patients to do modality at home. They're not asked to do some of the other digital biomarkers at home. But again, I think this is wonderful.
It's not done at home. So the telespirometry is not done at home. It's done in the clinic.
It is. So Zephyr spirometry is done at home, and as is oral analytics. That relies on an app on the phone, so people can do those things at home. And we're essentially running those DHTs at other sites right now. But again, I think the goal is to reduce patient burden, but also still have a comprehensive clinical data set that we'll be able to compare modalities data with. And it's what I love is about what we've done with modality is we've rolled it out to 4 sites so far. So we've got Massachusetts General Hospital, where we've got James Berry, who's the lead PI there and also very knowledgeable about DHTs, Baylor College of Medicine, and University of Puerto Rico, Instituto Roosevelt in Bogota, Colombia. Those are the 4 sites. So you can hear already that we selected sites that would have a variety of patients. Many are going to be Spanish speaking. And so we wanted to test your modalities platform across a number of different parameters. So not just men and women, people of different ethnicities and people who different languages as their primary language. And so the last country that we have planned for now would be India. We've got sites that we're bringing up there, and we're really looking forward to rolling out modality there as well.
That's fantastic. And you brought up that one of the goals of doing this also in a non-competitive way, and in a way that actually allows to share the data with the community, is to help the regulatory process also. So we all know that many of these measures are currently exploratory when they're being used in interventional trials. We are, of course, working with with the regulators to establish trust and understanding that this data can be used, for example, as supportive data in regulatory decision processes. It has not happened. We are not aware of a digital health technology that has been used in ALS for an approval. There hasn't been many approved therapeutics to begin with, so we are all relatively early with this. But it is there is good examples where conversations are happening. For example, with Pridenia and Pridopidine, who are currently investigating whether to move forward in a phase 3 study, for example, supported by speech measures as exploratory supportive evidence in phase 3 study. So that's an example. But we are all working together as a community to establish the underlying data and evidence that is going to help that. That was a question by the audience. Do you want to add to this, Amy?
I mean, yes. I mean, I think that hopefully the audience will understand that there are many different steps, right, that allow you to validate your platform to ultimately be used in clinical trials as a decision-making tool. And it starts from like what you do in your shop, David, where you're just validating that the metrics that are captured are actually measuring the changes that we believe they are. And then it goes all the way to, well, are those measures that we're capturing, are they actually telling us something about dysfunction of the patient? So you have to go through all those steps. And that's where our study, where we're relating our data to the patient-reported outcome and a number of other features, allows us to help make those interpretations. And then, yeah, ultimately using it in the context of ALS. So you don't just do it once. You want to have some independent replications to show that the tool is really reliable. And so that's where we're filling in that gap and we're working, already hand in hand with folks at FDA and CPATH and other organizations to identify what we need to do in this phase to help other companies implement this platform. And again, specifically under the ALS umbrella, we meet with the NIH and FNIH folks regularly to talk about this particular topic and how we can advance the use of DHTs to clinic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's important to understand that this is a group effort, actually an international group effort. There's programs such as Precision ALS in Europe that are doing a similar effort over there in some of the European countries. There is, Capture ALS in Canada. There's Everything ALS that are doing a great data collection in the United States predominantly, and other similar. And it's important to collect data independently on one hand, because you want to have independent confirmation of some of the findings. That's important. At the same time, and that's one of the questions here as well, how does the data engine repository tie in with other biorepositories, such as the CDC National ALS Registry or the all ALS data that's being collected now?
Yeah, awesome. So we are, okay, so under ALS, the plan is to get a data portal up and running that will cover all of these large natural history data sets across the US. And we have a number of academics who are ready to submit those data sets. The other ALS nonprofits, ALS TDI, Answer ALS, we're all ready to submit our data to the portal so that these data can be mined in the same place by everyone. So that's one possible way. But we chose DNA Stack's product because it is a federated platform that allows us to easily compare data that's coming off of other studies using the same platform. So I think we're thinking about how we can do that. And it's not just, to other ALS studies, but how can we compare modalities data to modalities data used in a Parkinson's study? So again, we're trying to work with DNA Stack to to kind of allow for the cross analysis of these data sets. And it's at the top of our minds, because we don't, we're all doing different studies, and we do want to be able to compare them and use them as independent validations or not. And so there are going to be other cloud-based tools that I think we'll be able to bring to bear on data sets that are sitting in different platforms in different places. Yeah.
Beautiful. And we actually arrived at the end of today's webinar. It's been a fantastic conversation with you, Amy. I really appreciate what you're doing with Target ALS and the underlying thinking. It's really a significant game changer for the community, the ALS community. I want to thank you very much for making time today, Amy. This webinar was recorded. It's going to be available on YouTube, and so for everybody to review it again. And if you have any questions, Amy's email address, I think, is available on the web. Mine is available. So please reach out to us.
Please reach out to me. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk today. David, this was a pleasure. Thanks.
It was a great pleasure. See you around. Okay. Bye-bye.